Let's see. Here we go. Okay, we are live. Welcome, welcome. I am your fairy godmother, Tamara Angela, and today's guest, I'm going to do as I always do and let my guests introduce themselves because I think it's important for us to kind of like I'm going to look at you one way and you kind of have these extra things that you want to be able to say for yourself. So I'm going to let you give like all of your social media and stuff, and then so you do your intro first, and then I'm gonna start telling them how I even came across you and why we're even here.
Okay,
So
well, good evening and happy Friday. My name is Yael Gordon. I go by Yaya, and I am from Louisiana. I am a proud Louisiana Creole and Cajun from Louisiana, and I'm a historian and a genealogist, and I specialize in antebellum history, plantation history, and Black history, everybody's history, really. And so I'm also a writer, consultant, researcher, and so I am very, very excited about being here on this evening. Have my bachelor's in history, master's in museums preservation, PhD candidate in higher education, and so I do a lot of research work, not only across the country but also internationally just as well. And so it's just a pleasure to be here speaking with you this evening and everyone who's on. Creole culture, hello.
yes, Creole culture is here, and they said hey. So welcome, welcome. So I'm excited. So you're one of those people where I can't remember the exact slice in time where we met,
Mhm.
but it's just like, okay, you've always kind of been on my radar. Um, and a while ago, I think you were in school at one point or doing like a project or something, and you worked family, uh, on some of my family history for me as well. And it was at a time where I was like, okay, I need to start kind of digging and putting things in writing, because as it goes, a lot of things get passed down by mouth. Um, and since then, I've still like I held on to all of the work that you did and drew from that to even go deeper in the last like probably like last year or so. So you and this was like what I know it was at least like 5 or 6 years ago
Yeah.
when you started the work. So then I put it away and then I held on to it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna pull this back out. So super valuable work. Um, and I wanted you to come on today because Black History Month, we're always giving Black history facts and talking about like giving certain history that we don't talk about all the time because we talk about the Martin Luther Kings and the Harriet Tubmans and the Sojourner Truths and um not discounting anything that they did, but there's so much rich history for us. And we're at a time that's like really pivotal in our country to be able to stand up and really, really talk about the contributions of Black Americans to this society. So I'm like, okay, I wanted you on here twofold. Definitely so we can kind of dispel some of those myths that we have, because there's lots of myths. I even did a whole series on superstitions and how we even get to some of those superstitions. Like why are we still talking about this? Do you even know where it comes from?
Mhm.
And looking at the origins of those. So that's always been interesting to me. So I wanted us to kind of talk about the origins of where some of this stuff comes from, things that we're still talking about today and we don't even think of. And then the other piece is definitely discussing something that kind of came up for me, even in my own family research, looking at Black Americans in specific, um, and our desire to be linked with Native American heritage. It used to be a joke kind of coming up in the 80s. It's like, oh, I got Indian in my blood. Of course, we don't use the term Indian to be sensitive, but it was a thing in the 80s. And just talking about that, like, where does that idea come from for African Americans to say, like, okay, if it's mulatto, It's not white, it's Native American. So we're going to talk about that a little today too. If you guys are joining us live, we can see the comments. So type your comment in, and I can give Yaya the question. So then that way we can have you guys join into the conversation. So we're going to start out. One of the things that became quite popular over the last year, especially on Facebook,
Mhm.
in the age of AI, we've had a lot of fake pages
Mhm.
come up on the internet with various information, right? Anything from 80s and 90s pop culture to current events, right? So you have these pages that pop up. But we've had a lot of Black history type pages that popped up, especially really over the last year. So I want to kind of throw that out there to start the conversation. Um, Talking about how do you decipher what pages are real? Um, what information is real? Like looking at that.
Okay, so on social media, especially on pages like Facebook, that's where you see a lot of this replication of these various pages. They have all of this history, a lot of this Black history that is popping up online. And for those of us who are in the research world, we kind of can tell because we will see this information being replicated across various pages. It's the same information over and over and over again, and then it gets to become a point where the information is replicated, but then it's not cited at all. And so
Mm,
you're starting to ask questions. Okay, well, where's the citations? Where do these images come from? Who said this? Where's this research coming from? I can name a few of these pages that once people who notice these patterns, when you call them out, they'll start to block you because they don't want you asking questions. I've been blocked several times from some of these pages. In one in particular, Black men in higher education. That's one page that I don't know who took over this page, but they were replicating a lot of information, and what that is actually called is called scrapping. And so they'll take others' information and paste it and post it on their pages. And so there are a lot of creatives who are online whose information is actually getting stolen a lot. And one of the things that I try to tell people all the time is if you do
mm,
not want your research or your information put out there and taken and used for someone else's purposes, don't put it online. Because our history,
mm.
especially Black history, is so vulnerable to things like that. Sometimes it's people behind the pages, sometimes it's someone from another country. Then it's also bots and AI that's replicating the information. If they are speaking to you in a manner that does not seem human or is giving answers that are very, very evasive, it is not a real page. When you have these pages that are saying
Okay.
something like buy this shirt, my disabled son created this image, that is not a real page. They'll give you these links for you to buy this information. It can very well be about Black history or even Louisiana history or Maryland history, but they are not real and it is scams. So you have to be extremely, extremely mindful with that. And again, protect your work. If you do not want it replicated, don't put it out on places like social media, because your great grandmother's image is now going to go on that page and it's going to be have she's going to have a whole new identity. That happens to a colleague of mine who does Creole genealogy. I know Creole culture has probably dealing with the same thing. And so it's really disrespectful. I know we want to
Yeah.
learn our history, but we have to be responsible and we have to research. If you cannot research, if you're just looking at a post and just acknowledging it and thinking that it's true, then you haven't done your due diligence. It's really offensive to the Black history that you say you want to actually learn. So you have to research and learn what the motive is behind that and what is true and what's not true, because it can be 95% true with that 5% inaccuracy or myth that makes the whole thing untrue.
Right. Because a lot of those pages got so much engagement. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they got the engagement started based on the photos, right? So
Yes.
you got these beautiful, beautiful photos. And we already know most people don't read at all.
Correct. Correct.
And so they drew you in with these beautiful photos, and then maybe like a name that is maybe prevalent in a
Hmm.
certain area.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden you see people hop on and they're like, oh, that's my family last name. And they'll recount their whole history. And the next thing you know, there's another post
Yes.
that kind of takes, I started seeing it. I was like, wait a minute. They're
Hmm.
taking stuff out the comments,
Yes.
using something with AI and creating a whole nother scenario for a whole nother post.
Creating a whole nother scenario because we think we're helping or acknowledging, say, our families, our own histories in these comments. And it's like you said, it's taking from all of that. So now the information that you have voluntarily shared, it's going to be placed somewhere else as someone else's research when it was actually just you acknowledging your family. And along with the popularized images, we were talking before the show started about Marie Laveau. Many people know about Marie Laveau. She was a voodoo queen here in Louisiana, practiced voodoo and also Catholicism. And there was even at one time a painting that was associated with her that was said to be her. A great friend of mine, Jeremy Simeon, dispelled that. It is not her painting. It's not a painting of her, even though it was bought under the thought that it was her. And so, but then you
Mm,
have these photographs of people saying that this is her, this is her or her daughter, and then they're even pulling photos or images from American Horror Stories and saying it's her, when you can just do, it's not easy research, but just research her family and research the fact that her own children at the time she was still alive said that she never had any likeness of her photoed or even painted ever, because she
mm.
did not want to be exploited, not before and not after she passed away.
Oh,
So there
wow.
are no images. So if you see one,
Mm.
it is not her.
It's not even her.
Not her.
Yeah. Because I've seen, it's like one image in particular, and they'll say it's her. And
Mhm.
then the next thing you know, they'll say it's her daughter. And I'm like,
Correct.
that's the same picture, though.
I know exactly what post you're speaking of. And someone and one of those a Marie Laveau documentary page blocked me from also, because you have to, and it's not to go after these people, but it's really to go after them, because you have to stop providing inaccurate information. As you said, people don't read and they definitely don't research. And now that's how falsehoods continue. Respect that family, because there are so many descendants that come from that family, and you're putting out information that is going to make others wrong. Why would we purposely want to make other people wrong? That's not fair to them.
It's the craziest thing. It's almost like a race for something, especially with,
Mhm.
I mean, because you have these databases full of the information, and for some reason people are just kind of, I guess, racing for likes or
Mhm.
clicks and stuff. Like, so let me hurry up and put this up here so people can look at my stuff and like my stuff, and I can put the info out first. And it's kind of a really weird space to be in, especially when people seem to have an aversion to the truth
Mhm.
online anyway.
Yeah.
it's a
I
it's a
think
strange space.
there was recently, within the last week, a post that gave descriptions of, say, color and um, identity. And like one of them was a Sambo, one of them was a high yellow, things like that. And the last one on the list was Creole. And it had the description of French or Spanish. And a very, very popular platform put this post up. And I'm like, wait, this is not accurate. Those of us who are Creole, we know this is not accurate. It has nothing to do with being just a French person or Spanish person or even a mixed person. Yes, there were French
Yeah.
Creole, they have Spanish Creole. We have Africans who were Creole. It means born
Mm-hmm.
in Louisiana. And so, you have people who will argue that down because of something that, oh, well, my great grandfather was a Creole and this is what he said. Well, it's not accurate. So and especially it makes it hard for people who are not from here to continue with the stereotype of what
Yeah.
it is and what is actually not. So yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about that a little bit too. Just those myths and mistruths and things like that that get passed down through the family. Um, and I have a couple on both sides of my family because for me, I my research had to dig into both of my grandfathers. So I had to dig in for my maternal grandfather. We had history up to a certain point, and it was written down. Everybody kind of knows like what the lineages are. Um, and then it stopped at one person. And even when I was kind of brought in as the younger generation to kind of pick up the baton, um, there was resistance going back past this one person. And I kept saying, well, if we start digging, the paperwork is going to tell us what it's going to tell us. Like, if y'all are down there and you know the stuff, like, why not just share it? Well, there was this idea on that side of the family that um, somebody like grew up on a reservation. I remember hearing from a very young age that my maternal grandfather's father was Native American, and that they grew up on a reservation. And like that was just the thing. And they were Iroquois. Now, at that time, I mean, there was no way, there was no Google. So I wasn't going to Google, like, did the Iroquois live in that area or anything like that, right? So that was just the thing. I had a cousin that used to go down there, used to go down south and go visit. And I remember him saying, this looks like a southern town. I don't see where there would have been like, it doesn't look like a resident, but we just, it just kept going. Well, I start, digging over the last year because we actually had like a family reunion on that side where they're trying to bridge the gap between the northern side that migrated. It's just one piece migrated north. Everybody else is still south. And I start digging and I tell my aunt, I said, there's nobody over here is Native American, like not even in the least. And when I researched, Iroquois didn't even live over there. Like, I don't even know. I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah. That's what I've been told my whole life. I'm like, I don't see it, but I'm going to keep digging. Dig back. The family member that they stopped at was actually a white man. And he was a Civil War. He was a Confederate soldier. And I was like, oh, this is probably why they stopped. Like, that's okay. But so it come to find out, my maternal great grandfather, the mulatto, had nothing to do with Native American. His father was white, and they were the recorded Black family. They were his father's recorded Black family. Like, he even has his father's name. Um, but I can't find his mother, who would have been Black, right? So I'm like, that's interesting. So I'm telling my aunt that, and she's like, no, I mean, we knew it was a white man in there somewhere, but no, it's still like they're insistent. And I'm like, what, like, can y'all just like, are we going to be able to let that go this year? Or, and then on my dad's side, my grandfather, who I mean, I grew up with my paternal grandfather was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, a second parent to me. My dad's parents were like my second parents. And we didn't know that he came from a Puerto Rican ancestry. Our generation did not know. His niece knew. Like, his niece knew, like, oh yeah, we're part Puerto Rican, but and I'm like, nobody wanted to share that, and they were just like, no, like we know, it wasn't a secret, but it also wasn't told. My grandfather just simply told me when I did a a book report. He said, um, like my grandfather came over on a boat. And I said, well, all the slaves did. He said, no, they were never slaves. They came over on a boat, though. I'm like, okay. We figure out, okay, we see it written down in a record, right? Um, but there are pockets of things that are missing, people missing. We were told there was a last name change. I can't find a last name change. Like we were told a whole story about how we get this last name. That's not true because I'm able to trace the lineage and find it, and it stops somewhere, but it doesn't change where y'all said it did. So I'm finding that there are these, and even when I explained that to my aunt and my dad, they're like, "No, the name changed, blah 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 blah," and I'm like, "Y'all, this the paperwork right here." And so it's hard to get family members to kind of come out of what they've been told
Right.
their whole life. And I said, well, somebody made that up, or somebody said that, or somebody just got it misconstrued. But I said, back then they weren't really writing things down or recording it. It's us taking the time to, as a love offering, to actually research, compile, and write it down.
Right. I love how you say that what we do is a love offering, because that's literally what it is. Because so many of these people are going to be forgotten, so many of their histories are going to be rewritten, and we have to write it, put it as
Mm-hmm.
accurately as possible, no matter what that history is. Now, going back to the first matter. So yes, I will give a disclaimer that say yes, there are in fact persons of African descent, African Americans, Black people who do have Native American indigenous ancestry. Yes, that is a fact. Is it all of us? No. Is it a majority of us? Still no. It is a small population
Mm.
of individuals. Okay. And so, and when I say small, look at the billions of people that are in the world. And so when we hear these stories, oh, my great grandmother was Indian. I have these high cheekbones because they're from the Indians, or this hair or something from the Indians. And
Mm-hmm.
people, like I said, in the 80s, 90s, we believe that. And even still to this day, we still have this issue of believing, because once you get so many generations beyond, it's kind of hard to almost go back and prove some things. So it's easy to get away with saying, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
this is a fact, when you can't, when no one can negate what your fact may or may not be. So it's easy to do that. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
now I will say that there are also people who associate themselves with being Native American, who call themselves Native American, because they are descendants of freedmen from Native American. Native Americans did in fact own Black people as enslaved people. That is not a myth. That is actual fact.
Mm.
Look at, say, for instance, the five civilized tribes. You have the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Seminole, and Creek. The only ones that out of all of those five that were at least that did intermingle the most would be the Seminole. So you have a lot of Black Seminoles. Okay. Some of the others, especially like the
Okay.
the Cherokee, Choctaw, and even the Chickasaw, they were not as forthcoming as far as the intermingling. A lot of them assimilated into white culture, and so they saw the white culture,
Mm-hmm.
and they lived this capitalism life, they lived the property life, and so Black people, they were property to them. And so it it's a matter of not of some of those tribes not even wanting to be affiliated with us outside of us being property to them. So for instance, if you have like the Cherokee Nation,
Yeah.
they
Mm-hmm.
did not allow for any persons from their tribe to have children with someone who was Black. Now that did not mean that non-consensual situations did not happen, because they did, just as like they did with Europeans. They absolutely did. But that does not mean that those children were allowed to claim that Native person as their parent. And that person who had that child with this black person could very well be put
Mm.
out of the nation. And so there were very strict laws. They had their own slave codes. They had punishment for their
Mhm.
enslaved people. They worked them to death sometimes, just as the Europeans did. And so my thought of everyone saying that, we have this, we're so happy about this Native American ancestry, but we forget, or purposely forget, that some of them treated us no different than Anglo Americans, Anglo Saxons, other European Americans,
Yeah.
because we were still property to them. And so we're trying to almost lessen one oppressor opposed to the other
Mm.
oppressor. And I never understood why that
Mhm.
was. And even when we go into a DNA factor, I do genetic genealogy as well, and looking at a lot of DNA tests and analysis. um, DNA doesn't lie, people do. Okay, so when you're looking through these ethnicities, whether it's on Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, whatever, it's going to show you, where your ancestors are coming from. Some areas it may not show you as much because, say, for instance, France. In France, they do not allow DNA tests there. Now, someone who migrated from France, they
Okay.
can take the test, but so that number may be minimal, so it's not as large. But you also have some Native Americans in existence now who are still living on the reservations, who are not trusting of things like that because of the government, of course, and I understand that. But when you look at these results,
Mhm.
many people will not find any kind of indigenous whatsoever. For African Americans, a
Yeah.
majority of our ancestors are going to come from places like Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Louisiana. You're going to be Nigeria, Senegal. First enslaved people from here that were brought here were from Senegal. So you're going to have that. Now, in my DNA, my parents' DNA, yeah, we do have indigenous ancestry. I know this I know for a fact. On my dad's side, we have Chickasaw. His family from Mississippi. My ancestor,
Mhm.
who was a Confederate soldier, his father signed the Treaty of Chickasaw, 1830s. My mother's side, we're Choctaw, Gina Choctaw Indians, but the recognition is not there. Chickasaw most certainly do not, did not, and do not want to be affiliated with any persons who is not part of their nations. Now Cherokee, they did allow their freedmen to be part of their nation, but there was some legal battles over that. But even though I can confirm that I have Native ancestry, I have more European ancestry than Native ancestry. So my biggest question to anyone who says, "Okay, well, yeah, I'm Native American because my ancestors are Native American, but I'm black, but I'm Native American." How do you get to call yourself Native American when you have 8% Native American, but you have 30% European? Why aren't you calling yourself white? That to me doesn't make sense, because how are you choosing
Right.
the lesser over something that's more prominent? Now, I get, again, you want to remove yourself from that main oppressor, but they're both situations, because every matter and every relation is not consensual, and we cannot cherry pick that. There
Right.
was not always a kumbaya between black people and Native Americans, especially when white people started documenting and labeling Native Americans as mulatto, colored, Negro. That caused serious problems, because at some certain points there was no category for them to be listed as Native. So white people, when they're documenting them, it's like even on the census, sometimes they would list them as mulatto, Negro, or black. That didn't sit well
Mhm.
with Native Americans. No one wants to be at the bottom of the caste system. Nobody wants to be associated with
Mm.
black people, because that's associated with slavery, it's associated with savagery and badness. And so they wanted to remove themselves. So there is it's been a a complete disconnect in there. And even to say that, yeah, they helped us, and um they were proponents of Black people. Now, yes, in fact, there were some who were helping enslaved people run away, learn
Yeah.
things about the land, and become part of maroon communities. They were fighting alongside them, but but most certainly not all of them.
And that's interesting because I don't know. My dad has he's always had me watching a ton of westerns with him.
Hmm.
It's kind of our our thing. Um but those films have become more and more realistic, right? And so then you get into talking about the schools where they, had the Native Americans kind of basically kind of sell off their own and give their kids away and
Hmm.
for assimilation. Um and so we're watching these things and I'm like, wait a minute, because the story in the Black community is like Native Americans were completely benevolent and almost like they were a stop on the Underground Railroad. It's like, oh, if you're out west or, if you're further, towards out west, it's like, yes, come in. And like they were some type of oasis or refuge. But then I'm looking at these stories and I'm like, how did that happen when there were some of them who went with the white man and
Hmm.
turned on their own? Like
Absolutely.
when would they have time to come in and say, you know what? Bring all the runaway slaves and we're just going to give them refuge and help them, because it's almost this story that's painted as if they're alongside us and we're going against the white people. It's like
Hmm.
we're like kumbaya, arm in arm. And I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense because they were fighting. There was enough infighting with them,
Correct.
with them getting land taken away and
Mhm.
their rights taken away and them getting pushed constantly past boundaries into different, and they were, creating the state boundaries and stuff. I'm like,
Mhm.
when did they have time to champion for our rights too? Because that
Correct.
ain't making no sense to me.
Right, whether they were on a Trail of Tears or anything else, they had their own battles. And so even
Mm-hmm.
on the Trail of Tears, those who had enslaved, some of them took their enslaved with them on those Trail of Tears. So you're like, okay, well, these people are getting grouped up and forced to move, but they still are oppressing people in while they're being forced to move out. So that shows just like what kind of dynamic is really going on here. And so
Yeah.
that Black people who were enslaved people were property. That's money. They can trade those
Yeah.
individuals just the same as whites could put those individuals up for mortgages. And so that was
Mm.
collateral. That gave a little bit of status, upper mobility. In fact, I was talking about some free persons of color this past weekend, and how at one point in one parish in Louisiana there was the slave patrol. Free persons of color were required to be part of the slave patrol, so they were
Oh
patrolling
wow.
to catch enslaved people who had ran away. Well, same thing for Native Americans. Those who did some for some of those nations, if they did not own enslaved people, they had to still patrol to make sure that the enslaved people of the ones who had more were not running away. So it's still
Mm.
using your own people against, an oppressed
Yeah.
oppressed group. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. See, and I think you said something else that you mentioned something else that I'm like, yeah, this is probably part of it too. There was a part in there where you were saying, like, how as Black people, there's like, it's like, how do you conveniently forget that these are the things that are going on? And then the story gets passed down totally differently. I think, I've been looking at just several documentaries. Because every once in a while I fall down a documentary rabbit hole.
Hmm.
Um, and I started because my aunt also told me this story about on my maternal grandmother, because this is my maternal aunt, my mom's older sister, and she was saying that on their mother's side, because my aunt is in Louisiana as well,
Hmm.
um, and she was like, yeah, she said, but my mama's people, half of the majority of them are in Florida,
Hmm.
but the other half are in. They came from rural Georgia. And we started looking the places up. She's like, I kind of know the name of the place, but I've never thought to look it up. And so she was like, look it up so you can see where it is in proximity to where you are. So I look it up, and I start, putting pieces together as I'm looking in ancestry and stuff like that. And she says, well, she said her aunt told them that they came from a specific place in Georgia, and right now I can't even recall it. And she said that's where she was Calhoun, Georgia. But the city is there. But she said she said my aunt said the only reason why her aunt knew where she came from was because she found it written down in a Bible.
Hmm.
They moved to upstate New York, and that was kind of it. And she said her auntie told them, her auntie's mom, her great aunt, said, "Look, okay, fine. It's like you found it. It's in the Bible." Like the younger kids didn't remember
Hmm.
that they were born somewhere else. It's like the older kids kind of knew. It was like, we don't talk about that anymore. That's it. You're in Buffalo. This where you at. We moving on. And I see, and I told my aunt, I said, well, I tried to just kind of do some research on the town as best I could without going to like archives or things like that. And I said, I can't really find anything, but whatever happened in that history is not going to be written down like that for you to just be like, oh, this is what's going on at that time. But even when I look at the city where they're from, there's still under 1,000 people that live there.
Mm.
Um, in 2025, which
Wow.
gives you a gauge. You know what I mean? Um, and it's just this recurring theme that I see as I'm reading and as I'm looking at things and documenting things. There's this trauma that is so deep that we chose to consciously forget.
Hmm.
And in the space of us choosing to consciously forget, the oppressor was already rewriting the story because
Hmm.
they got to win, right?
Yeah.
They got
Hmm.
to win. So they were already consciously rewriting the story as they told us to forget and as we chose to forget.
Hmm.
And so it kind of makes it convenient for these other myths to come in and settle in and be undisputed.
Correct.
And I'm
You're
like, this is why we have to go back and actually write this, because what actually happened matters.
right. You're absolutely correct. There is a traumatic disconnect, and it runs so deep. And you mentioning, Buffalo in the South. A lot of people who migrated from the South. The South has a very, very brutal and dark history, but I love the South. I wouldn't change it for
Yeah.
anything. I love being here. But if you're not here, you really wouldn't know, because a lot of us haven't been able to escape what's still here today.
Mm,
And so we
yeah.
have to relive it in other ways. And it's not to say we're living in a fantasy, but we're trying to soften that that generational trauma that we have been through. And so that's why we
Yeah.
associate our lives with certain things, or remove certain parts of history, or cherry pick, our ancestry and who our ancestors were. And that's why I love being a historian, because I don't cherry pick any of it. I look at people as people, and people sometimes do horrible things no matter who they are. And so you look at it for those people, and
Yeah.
that as that person, but find out the best accuracy as you can. and just tell the story. Just tell it. And you have to live through it, and you don't have to agree with it. But this is what actually happened. And so I think for a lot of us, especially those who had, say enslaved ancestors, it's easier for us to choose a side that wasn't over popularized with owning people. I mean, it's that yes, there were
Mm,
Native Americans who did, but it wasn't as wide and large as, say, ownership by white persons. But then we have to look at the
yeah.
types of ownership. Sometimes we think about these owners and we're thinking, oh, everyone owned 100 enslaved people or more. And that's not true. Those were the large slave owners.
No.
But many of them owned five, owned two, owned one. But that does not mean that they're not still a slave owner. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the law of the land at
Because
that
those
particular
two are
time.
still slaves.
Correct.
Those
Those
two are
one or
still
two,
slaves. So
right? Whether they worked on a plantation or whether they worked on someone's ship, they're still an enslaved person. And so, if
yeah.
we look at how some of, say, even the Seminoles would have treated their enslaved people and allowed the mixing, with them, someone could say, oh, well, they love their enslaved people, they own them. But again, that's still property. But you would
Mm-hmm.
argue when a white person does the same thing. Here in Louisiana, we have that all the time throughout some of our family generations, where you have a white person owning an enslaved woman, having children by them, freeing them or not freeing them, and someone could come and say, "Oh, well, that was rape, but that was non-consensual." Again, I can't put myself in that circumstance. How can you say this was consensual with Native Americans, but not the same with the white person? So you really have to look at the dynamics of all of it and not pick and
Mm-hmm.
choose how you want to interpret history. I think that is extremely, extremely important. But again, the forgetting is so convenient for us to forget and leave out certain parts because it makes us feel better. But I am a firm believer, if you do not go through it and grieve it, be mad at it, be angry, be happy at it, then you won't really
Yeah.
be able to fully process and understand.
Yeah. And it's even so, I'm a, Zora Neale Hurston, James Baldwin, like I revisit those,
Hmm.
their work from time to time. And I just first of all, Barracoon is like that's an amazing piece of work from Zora. Like if you haven't read that, um it is necessary.
Yes.
It's very necessary.
And shout out to the
Um
Cotillo Association. Absolutely. They're doing wonderful things.
yeah, it's just I just remember reading that book and having to sit it down and just say and like being angry
Hmm.
that the things that they were discussing in that book, I'm like, why did we just talk about that yesterday? Like, why is that a conversation on the internet?
Right.
Like, why? You know, just that and like in reading Zora and I just reread Their Eyes Are Watching God, and I'm like, yeah, like this is pretty much 100 years ago at this
Hmm.
point, pretty much, give
Hmm.
or take. Um, and this is still valid, all of it.
Hmm.
Every once in a while, you can watch the Jeffersons or something, and it's like, nobody really thinks like that anymore. That joke is aged, or people won't get it, right? You
Hmm.
got our shows we grew up on, and you got the kids today who are doing think pieces on stuff, and they're like, oh, that it's like, oh, that was a different frame in time, right? But you read these classics, and I'm angry because
Hmm.
I'm like, this has been sitting in the book the whole time,
Yeah.
and we're squabbling trying to find answers, and they had already solved it and they had already talked about it for us.
Hmm.
But we conveniently forget. We have
Hmm.
selective amnesia with
Hmm.
so much of it. And coming from a clinical background, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that is trauma based. It's like, we're going to leave this life behind. We're never going to talk about it. We're never going to discuss it. We're not even those people anymore. We're going to come up
Mhm.
here and we're going to do something new. And by all means, you could kind of do that unless you ran into somebody that knew somebody, like,
Billion.
because those
Correct.
things happen, right? So
Hmm.
you could really kind of fall off the face of the earth, and
Hmm.
no one would know until
No
somebody
one.
else who was trying to fall off the face of the earth came over there and they're like, hold up,
Right.
and then they tell the story.
Hmm.
I mean, I even remember that happening going away to college in 96. It was like you could just like leave and nobody would know where you were,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you have those spaces where you can have the selective amnesia,
Hmm.
but then
And
how, like,
reinvent
I
yourself.
was thinking about that. Yeah, and complete rebranding, complete reinvention. And you could go on with life happily ever after. In most cases, I'm pretty sure that that works. But I'm looking at these documentaries. I watched one about Ocala, Florida.
Hmm.
Um, there was one that it was like, I'm looking at it, and the common thread is where there was ethnic cleansing,
Hmm.
or as they like to call them, massacres, but ethnic cleansing. Um, we left and we said, don't talk about that. Don't
Right.
talk about that. It was a coping skill, but it has done us so badly because we chose to forget who we were. We chose to forget names that need to be spoken.
Right.
And we chose to forget those circumstances. And so now, today, I think there's this false sense of progression.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, we came past that. No, we didn't.
Right.
No, we really didn't. The progression isn't as big as you think. Because
Right.
right here, 100 years ago, Zora was talking about this, and it's the same damn conversation.
Yeah.
We didn't go as far as we thought we did. And I think that that's where a lot of the disconnect is too. That selective amnesia has made us think that we progressed and did more than we did. Have we progressed? Yes, there have been steps. Um, but so much of it is still in the same place. We're still having the same conversations. We still have the same mindset when it comes to a lot of things, relationships and family, and it's done us a disservice.
It has, and I think depending upon the times, it's how it's looked at and accepted or not accepted is different. And I'll give you an example why. People back then would forget
Mm,
and reinvent themselves as a form of protection. If someone caused a ruckus, killed a person they weren't supposed to kill, and they ran away, or a revolt happened, they were not allowed to speak about it. They were supposed to act as though they knew nothing about it and act as though they were dumb in order to be able to survive. Because if you know about it, then that means you may participate in this. So that white person or whomever needs to watch this person, this black person. And so now
mm,
we've
mm-hmm,
carried that, and so we've had elders who didn't explain things like that because they've been so programmed to forget and not talk about it, that when we do the same things now, we don't really understand the reason why, and we don't have the same rationale of what the reasons why they did it. Looking into another case,
mm-hmm.
say something like child abuse. It's horrific. But in
Big one.
antebellum days, when you had enslaved women, some of these enslaved women would purposely tell the owners that their child was deaf and dumb. They would break their children's limbs to make them devalue, to not be sold.
Mm,
And so that's bad property. The owner's not going to sell a lemon. So that allows that woman to keep her child.
mm,
Now you have women who may whip their child or spank their child in public or something, and that's of course abuse. And so, but people see what their parents done and what their grandparents done. Everybody grew up on whippings. When I was a kid, everybody had whippings. Everybody had, got in trouble.
Yeah.
And so you continue to do these things and not understanding why you do these things. But it was realistically a way to keep their child from getting in trouble with that owner or that white person, because you always have to make sure your children are respectful, even the adults. And so they were programmed to minimize themselves, or you're beating the crap out of your kids because you want to save their life. And so if you constantly saw that being passed
Yeah.
down for generations, you don't understand why you're doing that. You just think you're just doing that. But it was a reason then why they were doing that. And it was to save our lives and save our children's lives. So we do things and we don't even understand, why we do them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because I was reading some stuff, what is it? Women Race Class from Angela Davis, and she speaks to that. The Black slave woman not being able to express femininity, because it's not the same as what white femininity was at that time, how fragile white femininity was. It's like we didn't get a chance to be fragile. We barely got a chance to acknowledge motherhood,
Correct.
right? Like we weren't allowed to acknowledge that we had feelings for our children, and that we loved our children, and that we loved our family, and we loved our surrogate family, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get a chance to convey those things. And she was also talking about like how the younger kids, who weren't ready to work in the field, how the mothers had to kind of put their babies along the perimeter of the field, and some of the little kids would have to watch the babies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is still being done today. It's like, here,
Mm-hmm.
you watch, the kids are watching the
Mm-hmm.
other kids,
Or
right?
dropping them off
Like
with
that
the eldest
is
woman on
literally
the place to watch all of the kids. Now you have a woman who's 80 years old
like, yeah,
watching all these kids. So you dropping your child off to your great
watching a
grandmother's house.
3-year-old.
What? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
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 So
And it's the expectation. It's the
mhm.
expectation that they'll do it.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what was
Yeah.
taught, and that pattern, that cycle was not broken. And so we just do it and thinking that
Right.
it's just a thing to do.
Right. It's like, well, she's at the house. Like, why can't she? Well, because she
Why
can't
should
really take
she?
care of herself.
Right.
Yeah. Why should she? Why should she be 80 taking care of a 3-year-old? Like
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't even kind of balance out.
Right.
Yeah. So she talked about like a lot of those points, and I was like, huh. Like I was seeing the parallels to exactly how we lead things today, and we've never thought about it. Like it's just
Right.
like, this is what was done, this is how it was done, this is
Correct.
black women, it's like strength, strength, strength. And then I see women today who are like, I'm tired of being strong, and I'm like, we got things to be strong for. Let's just be strong for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Reasons
Right.
that matter to us. Like, let's use our
Right.
strength in areas that are going to benefit us, instead of using it across the board. But even in reading her work, and I'm like, I see where that gotta work twice as hard, gotta work 3 times as hard, and got like, I see where all of that ideology comes from.
Mm-hmm.
We have not spent the time, I think, coming from the clinical world, we create treatment plans. Treatment plan said, here's the goal, here's the objective, here's the intervention. It's almost as if we need like a treatment plan to say, look, these are the things that have been going wrong for so long. Like, these things are obsolete. We don't even have to operate that
Right.
way. How do we go ahead and start to phase that out of our system? Because not only is it obsolete, it's probably never coming back. Like, the need to think that way is like, we just don't even live in a world that needs that. So how
Right.
do we just start to move those things out the way? But it's like, if you don't really understand the history, if you don't really look into that, and that's why I think it throws me too when I see Black folks saying, I don't want to watch another slave movie. I don't want to see another slave movie. I understand not wanting to see the trauma piece of it, because some of these are just like, Black folks are slaves and it's part of the storyline. But there's a history that goes deeper in there that
Mm-hmm.
we continue to miss, like the actual truth of it that we continue to miss. And if we gloss over it and forget it, like we're just gonna keep repeating it. Our families won't be right, our friendships
Right.
won't be right, the way we treat each other won't be right, because we're literally still operating off of slave narratives,
Mm-hmm.
literally
Literally.
every day.
Yeah. I think so.
Like
So
loudly.
one thing I actually work on and work for plantations. Okay. So I'm that black person who
Mm,
works in these spaces. And so imagine how for the normal person that is a traumatic experience every single day, but as a historian, it's a trauma that I go back to every single day. I would not do anything else in the world if I had a choice, but research these types of lives and these people because they've been forgotten and
mm,
they have so much stories to tell. And when these people were freed, they didn't have someone like you to clinically diagnose them with anything. They didn't have someone to say, okay, this
yeah,
person is bipolar. This person may have schizophrenia. I mean, they said that a slave who ran away that they had a disease of drapetomania. That was white people's clinical, diagnosis for us. We had drapetomania,
right.
but or something like I mean, it's still in existence today.
Mm-hmm.
Senility, we had that, but black people couldn't feel pain, and so we had a higher pain threshold. So which means, and we're just property, so we can't think without them. So we didn't have these psychiatrists and psychologists to help us after the fact, whether that's a physical imbalance, a chemical imbalance or anything. And so we've had to deal with it ourselves and hide so
Yeah,
much of that pain. And then again, recreate ourselves and our histories. And because someone may have said they had a Native American ancestor, but come to find out it was a white ancestor, but they're covering up that pain. They're covering up that side of their life that brings them so much hardship because they don't want to see that they
yeah,
come from someone who has treated them, so horribly and continue with systematic racism. And so it's hard for a lot of people to acknowledge and deal with. And but we don't speak greatness and life into ourselves as much as we should, especially women.
mm,
Going back to how women back then, they would minimize their children in order for their child to not get sold and say something was wrong with the child. You can look at sometimes a conversation between parents today. A white woman, you can tell her, "Oh, you have a great kid." Like, "Oh yeah, he plays soccer, he does this, and he's on the swim team, whatever." And sometimes you may have, I may say, "Oh, you know what? She all right. She kind of smart mouth, but she a good kid." We kind of say those little dumbing
mm-hmm,
down things, not realizing or
mm,
we're thinking that it's because we don't want people to think that we think so much of ourselves when really and truly we should be
yeah,
thinking a lot of ourselves. We don't have to protect
mm,
ourselves. Or I say we shouldn't have to protect ourselves anymore. But sometimes, especially in
yeah,
this world, we do, especially when you have, say, a young black man as a child, a young black, a boy as a child. It's different.
yeah,
And so you have to not make people think that, oh, he's very confident, oh, he's this, because then that puts a target on that person.
yeah, mm.
That's just the
That's a
life,
really good point.
unfortunately, we live.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like, oh, do they see that they're great? They think they're great. Hold up. Like, let me pause that,
Bring
and
it back. Yeah.
we subconsciously think down, like talk down or
Mm-hmm.
minimize,
Mm-hmm.
what we have going on to try to, mm,
Right.
man, I never even thought about that, but that's true. Yeah, because I see women say that, but like, oh, this is my little headache. They'll call their kid
Correct.
their little headache, or
Mm-hmm.
this is my stress or whatever. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like,
Like,
wait,
do you know
where
we're
did that
free?
even come from? And it
Do
becomes
you know we're free? Like, what?
right.
Yeah.
It becomes trendy. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we live with so much of, I mean, and colorism gets into a whole nother conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
we live with so much of that trauma today, and it hasn't become as unraveled
Yeah.
as we need it to be, and as I think we kind of think it is. And
Yeah.
I mean, we've just gotten different things to focus on, with integration and all that stuff like that. It gave us something else to focus on. So I don't think that there's ever been a point, to even speak to your point. It's like after that it became, I mean, we never stopped being slaves, because then you had what, chain gangs and
Sharecropping, Jim
um
Crow, everything.
sharecropping. Yeah, so it never stopped. It just
Right.
transitioned into something else. Prison reform,
Right.
because
And
that's
what it all
paid.
goes back to, it's beyond and so much bigger than race and gender. What it really is,
Yeah.
it's patriarchy and capitalism. Because
Mm-hmm.
200 years from now, someone is going to say we were all slaves because we were working these hours in a building every single day. We couldn't do anything. We had 2 days off that we had to prepare for Monday. And so we have, it's about money and
And in
power. Those in money and power.
2025, they were scraping over eggs.
Right. Like, oh my gosh. Like, we got the right to what, to the Civil Rights Act 1964. Can we last another 100 years? So we have come so far, but we've not come far enough. But people in the future are going to look at how we live and think that we're probably enslaved people, because we're enslaved to the system. We're enslaved to people who are in power, who have money.
Yeah.
And it's really about a caste system. They just use race and gender as the main foundation, because it's the two most easily identifiable things to cause dissension and confusion amongst people. And that's what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
perpetuates. And if we
Mm-hmm.
don't do the historical piece of it, I mean, yeah, I think there's trauma. There's never been, because even as I go back and I look at stuff, I'm like, there's just never been a point. I don't think in any society, but definitely not in American society, where there wasn't some type of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not been like,
It's this
but the
whole
trauma
land is trauma.
coincides with all of it. I
Mm-hmm.
can't, just even researching, because I'm just a nerd. Like, in no way, shape, or form am I a historian, but I'm just a nerd, like a curious nerd that likes to, like, what was this? And then I fall down rabbit holes. Like, that's my thing. I'm like, here's the rabbit hole for tonight. And then I'm
Right.
gone somewhere. Like
Yeah.
I'm on some other universe looking at things. So, yeah, there's not been a point where there wasn't trauma. And so I don't think we've just never recovered.
No.
And if you don't understand the history of that, and you don't see, because I hear people, they say all the time history is repeating itself. And one day I was like we're still living the history.
We're
It
still
didn't
living it.
repeat. We're still
It
living it.
is. Right.
It never stopped. It, like, there
Right.
was never a point where it stopped. So you can be like, oh, this
Right.
is a time loop. It's not a loop. It just continues.
Right.
There's no loop,
Because people will
because the
be
loop
people.
insinuates that it starts and stops, and it
Right.
doesn't.
It doesn't stop. There is all, it's how the old folks say, it's always something. It is always something from,
Yeah.
and you can't get beyond that. And it's like we're living in this thing daily, and you would think that we'd be used to it by now. But I think so many of us have this amazing thing called hope, that
Mm,
we just, we hope for the better. We try to understand that, this we just have to live and survive the best way that we can. But we also, in
Yeah.
that hope, we need to find a way to be realistic, because
That's
if
where
not,
I'm at.
we're gonna lose everything. Everything's gonna be rewritten. So, like the myths our families have told us, the government is going to be telling us those same myths now and erasing our
Yeah.
histories. And whether that's with,
Yeah.
and I don't even want to speak in its existence, so I won't. But we have to protect our histories. When they say that, first of all, Black people's history did not start with slavery. And
No.
we there are so many people that we overlook. Yes, if you want to find your European ancestor, fine. You want to find your native ancestor, fine. But you also have Africans that we should be also finding. There are people right now who I match DNA tests to, that are in Africa. So many of us do.
Mm-hmm.
They want to learn about our histories, and even though they're going through issues over there now, I may have a relative from DNA from the Congo, but look at what's going on in the Congo right now. So the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
is catastrophic. It's
It
people.
is.
People are the problem. So, but we
Yeah.
have to find our truths. Don't run away from the truth. Get our truths, document it, because that's all we're going to have in the end. Because when they say that we have no history, before we were found and colonized in Africa somewhere, or it's we have to protect it. Even those who are in Latin countries, like you mentioned, Cuba. Yeah, a lot of Cubans, well, I can't say Cubans, but a lot of people from Cuba and Haiti, they were escaping to places like Louisiana during the Haitian Revolution, and they came in as
Mm-hmm.
free people. They were not, some of them, many of them were not enslaved. Now there were some that were enslaved, but some of them were not enslaved, and they came and lived here freely. And some of them went on to be slave owners themselves as free persons of color. But they also have African ancestry. I have
Right.
records that's called them Cuban Negro, and some of them were,
Mm.
enslaved, some of them were free. And so it all ties back to, for us, it's going to go back to Africa. Whatever else in between, that's whatever else in between. But we still have to never forget that this is our starting point, and we have to respect that and
Yeah.
not ignore it.
Yeah. And I think that part is just, it's super important because, I read something when I was researching the superstitions, because I was, that one was about deaths come in threes.
Mhm.
So I was researching like where that even, where that idea even came from. Um, and they were saying that there's this thought in the Mexicans were saying that like you die three deaths, right? And one of the deaths is that the last death is when people forget you and never say your name again. That is the final death. Um, and I was just like, wow, because we always talk about rest in peace, keep their memory alive, and things like that. And so there was this indigenous thought that like you live forever
Mhm.
when people continue to talk about you and continue to say your names. And I was like, that's so powerful for our family members, especially with ATRs being so trendy and popular. People wanting to do ancestor veneration and things
Mhm.
like that. It's like, you know, do you know, even just on a base level,
Mhm.
going back even in my family, like I've always been, clairvoyant. Um, your black folks just call it having premonitions.
Mhm.
That's what they call it. Um, but I knew I came by it honestly on my dad's side because my grandmother, she would give me the salt baths and be like, "All right, she's up tonight." Okay, like she would give me salt baths and stuff and anoint my head and
Mhm.
be like, all right, what'd you see? Nobody ever made a big deal. Like my mom and my aunt, the one I was talking about, my mom would always be like, all right, going over there and ask your auntie because y'all be on that like both of y'all see stuff, and I know. So it was always a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever said it was anything wrong with it. It was just like, all right, well, what did you see? Or okay, well, what happened? And it wasn't until I started doing the family tree stuff, then my uncle is a bishop,
Mm-hmm.
and then come to find out my great grandmother is a Black woman who's a preacher in what, the early 1900s. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that's a thing,
Yeah.
because that wasn't, so, and I found it in a newspaper clipping where it's like reverend, and I'm like, okay. So I asked my aunt, and I was like, you knew your grandmother was a pastor? She's like, yeah, we knew. And she told your uncle that he was going to be a bishop, and
Mm.
she told him exactly when he was going to get the calling. And so I'm like, okay, so even just hearing those things, like, it settles me, because I'm like, this is coming straight down the pipeline. Like, it's not, it's this is a real thing. There's no need to tuck that gift anywhere. There's no
Yeah.
need to call it anything else. It's a thing. It is what it is. And finding those things out about yourself, on the other side, on my grandfather's side, my paternal grandfather's side, all my grandfather's sisters were artists, sculptors. Their work is still on display in New York. My
Wow.
grandfather actually wanted to be an architect. He could draw. So when that creative side in me that writes books and published books, like when that comes out, I'm like, oh, I'm in good company. So even if you're not even going to scale this on a big level, if you're going to look at this, finding out your family history, you see yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives you permission to just be like, I come by that honestly. Because a lot of times, to even speak
Correct.
to what you're saying, we take that and say, oh, you got that bad attitude like your auntie, or you sassy like your grandma, or she's spitfire like this person. And we give those negative attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, well, you got this, you know, you're sassy like her. We don't
Mm-hmm.
talk about the fact that, you have artists, you have musicians, you have people, you like my grandfather, he never actualized his talent as an architect, because when he's coming up, there weren't Black architects like that he could access. It was easier for his sisters to be artists and sculptors because they're women,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
What's this Black man going to do drawing? Now he went and made his mark. Um, he made his mark. He did his thing. One of the first Black bus drivers for the metro system in Buffalo, and he trained a whole generations of drivers. Um, and so I mean, so he did his thing in his own right. But I just remember him saying, like, if you're gonna write the books, go write the books because you can, because there were things I couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of understanding where we come from too gets to help actualize things that maybe our loved ones and our ancestors didn't have capacity to do in their time,
Right.
but we have the freedom.
Correct. And that goes back to what I said earlier, like it's no matter who that ancestor is, you don't know what quality or characteristic you have take developed or was come to fruition through you from an ancestor. Even if that
Mm-hmm.
ancestor was an oppressor, you may have the gift of diplomacy, politician,
Mm.
like that ancestor who was fighting for the Confederacy. Something, they were a fiery person, but you're a politician now and you're fighting, for a political fighter, but you're fighting for the right side. They were fighting for the wrong side, but that's still like that's part of your history. So we can't, again, so
Yeah.
these bad people do good things and these good people do bad things. And so we have to embrace and look at all of that. Again, doesn't mean that you have to accept it, understand it. There's a difference between just accepting and understanding. But and I also think that, well, I know if you will never find yourself by ignoring your own or claiming someone else's history. You just won't.
Mm.
Because if you are
Yeah.
disconnected and you are not, and you're saying that your ancestor was this person or someone else, you are not connecting to to your truths. And so that's why you have so many
Yeah.
people who are, who when they take, say, some of these DNA tests and they find out these hard truths, oh, my father is not my father, my grandparent is not my grandparent, kind of thing, it hits them hard. And I always, that's why when I do a DNA test, I tell anybody, whatever I find is not my fault, but it's also not your fault. Okay.
Yeah.
So that, and the thing is, I don't know the reason we weren't there, but give grace because you never know the circumstance of what happened. But don't be
Yeah.
closed off to finding out who your family is. There's going to be some people who don't want you now to be in part of their lives, and that's okay. But at least be
Right.
open and try, because you can find so much commonality, and just embrace so much, or realize, understand why you're left-handed, or why you have asthma,
Mm-hmm.
and or eczema or
Yeah.
something, and everybody else in your family is is 6 feet tall, but you're 5'1". So
Mm-hmm.
you'll never find yourself by, especially purposely, claiming someone else's history. You won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it's that just as Black people, we've struggled with self identity for so long.
Right.
You know,
And I think that's
it's
one of
been an
another
issue
reason
for so long.
why we tag on to these other identities, and what comes easier is because we've been stripped of so much. Our
Yeah.
heritage, our culture, our language, our appreciation for our own beauty has been stripped from us
Mm-hmm.
for constantly, over and over and over again, and we've been told what we are not, and told we were just less than.
Yeah.
And so we're always looking to belong to something. And I'm going to say, we have a problem of wanting to belong. That Maslow's hierarchy, looking that sense of belonging, like, where do I belong in
Yeah.
this? So we go from being Jews to being Native American to being indigenous to being,
Yeah.
everything. We want to capture it all, because we have been, again, stripped of so much that we just want to belong. And there's
And that
nothing
gets
wrong
in the
with
way of us.
belonging.
No, and that point is how we end up inviting everybody to the cookout.
Correct.
And it's like, oh, let me be cool with this person, because that's one thing I always say. Like, there's that video that's going around where the guy says, I think he was Indian,
Hmm.
and he says his mother taught him, if you're ever lost or you need something, find a Black woman, because Black women are gracious and they're helpful and they help everybody. And I was like,
Yeah.
while that's kind of true, I don't really feel like owning that, but it speaks to that self identity. We have to be
Mhm.
pleasant and pleasurable to everybody. And now we haven't
Always.
we because I'm a proponent of gatekeeping. I like gatekeeping. I feel like we need to do a whole hell of a lot more of it. And I don't feel like having everybody at the table.
Right.
Everybody don't need to be at the table. We need to make our table and then gatekeep and take care of our own first. But
Right.
every time I say things like that, it sounds like, to some people, they're like, oh, like, that's such a radical concept. And I'm like, nah, like, you want, so Black women are like the 92%. We're tired. We're tired. You know why you're tired? We're tired because we've been doing all the wrong stuff. And that's something,
Correct.
even clinically, I teach my clients. I'm like, you're exhausted because you've exhausted all of your kindness and your empathy and your compassion on all the wrong areas. You've exhausted it in places that didn't ask you to do it. Nobody
Correct. Now we're
asked you to
tired.
be over
We're
there.
just tired now.
You chose to be over there. And you choosing to be over there fed something in your mind. And now you're exhausted in the things that actually need your compassion and your empathy and your know-how aren't going to get any pieces of you because you exhausted it on all the wrong spaces. And
Right.
so when I hear Black women saying, oh, I'm part of the 92%, oh, I'm part of the 92%, but I'm going to still be over here working because we got to clean up our own home. And that's
Right.
why I wanted us to have this conversation today too, because there's so many misconceptions, and I think our minds have been shifted to think in one way about what we're supposed to do as Black people, especially in these times like this today. And it's like, well, we've been going through this. This is not new. It looks a little different, but it's like it's still the same stuff we've endured before. We can do it again, but let's kind of call on some of the things that were done in the past that worked, and then let's not make some of the things that didn't work in the past, like let's not try to use those now. Like,
Right.
but you have to have the knowledge of what happened, and there's a disconnect in every single generation. Like every generation chooses those blind spots, and those blind spots are like immortal.
I think that when we are constantly identifying as, say, other things. Now again, true be it, yeah, my when I look at my ethnicity is Louisiana Creole. That is my family. That is my ethnic background because of Louisiana. But I'm a Black woman. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, I have to be able to do things that are going to protect Black people. If I
Mm-hmm.
do not assume the position and try to help the Black cause, then I'm not doing my job. If we are always trying to disassociate or do other things or identify elsewhere but not take care of our Blackness, we're going to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to continue to
Yep.
have people coming in and telling us, well, Black is this, and
Right.
Black is not this. And it's our sense of belonging, that issue would be healed when we know who we are and be a
Yeah.
collective protector of each other and our heritage.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds so, like, it's like I feel like that's so basic, but it's such a struggle. It's such a struggle because desire for white proximity takes over. And we just saw it with Hillman Talk. It's like,
My God, that was
it was a clusterfuck.
it
That's
was
what it
it was a
was.
clusterfuck and it was a fiasco. And I'm like, you have now this gatekeeping mentality in there that we're now against each other. And it's like, and see, I think that's where the term gatekeeping, where people have an issue with it, because there are some of us who try to keep some of us out of the room. And that's the biggest issue
Yeah, and that
because,
was the wrong gatekeeping.
yes, that's the wrong gatekeeping, because there are people that look like us who work at these institutions and in these high accolades that always get opportunities, but then the ones below them, they never try to help and pull them up or let them in the room. And that's the absolute wrong kind of gatekeeping. And that type, I am always an advocate against. But protecting it
Right.
ourselves and gatekeeping, that I will always be for. But something like Human TikTok could have been amazing. Everybody can get on the same page, but then you have the outsiders coming in whining, oh, well, why can't we be a part of this? it wasn't
I'll
it
just
wasn't
sit in the back of the classroom while you teach. You guys had to
Can
sit in
we
the
have
back of the
something?
class, and now I'll sit in the back of the class. Girl, if you don't go somewhere and have a seat.
And that things like that should show us how much we belong in this world, because everybody wants to do what we do. Our
Mm-hmm.
culture
Mm-hmm.
is everybody's culture. And
It is.
so it's And I'm tired of the tears. I'm tired of the whining. I'm tired of it all because we get treated like shit constantly. But we're so great. It is like, okay, how do we fix this to whereas, you know what, we're not going to come in and let anybody take what we have. And we're going to be strong and have a stronghold against all of this. No inner fighting, no inner, disagreements or anything else. Keep the disagreements in the house, not outside the house, because once people see that there's disruption, they're going to use
Yeah.
it. So many
Yeah.
people want to learn, and it could have been a great opportunity, but there, and this is one thing that I hate. I know if this would have continued to some point, then you're going to have people to come and try to negate what some of those professors and creatives were trying to do. Because on one hand,
They already did that.
it's crazy because
They
you
already
have
did that
people.
because there was somebody who came on and said, and it was one of us that
Mhm.
said, "Oh, this is a beautiful space, but make sure you research the professor before you take the class to make sure that they actually have credentials."
And this
And
is
I was
my
like, you
thing.
know what? Y'all don't research them podcast Negroes to
You
make sure
sure
that they
don't.
actually have healthy relationships before
You
you
sure
go and follow
don't.
them while they on tour.
Exactly.
Okay,
My One of my
I
biggest
was just checking.
issues, and it pisses me off because we are always screaming how we want to reclaim our history, how we want us to teach our history, us to provide the research and everything else. We want Black people and historians and researchers and scholars to be so great and not use but anytime some of us do say something or try to teach, then you have someone coming in and saying, oh, well, that's you're teaching a white man's history. You're learning from the white people. No, we actually did our due diligence and researched this. So either you want us to tell you the history or you don't. That drives me insane because you can, on one hand,
Right.
you want us to do it, but then when we do it, you have a problem with it and you're trying to minimize what we do. It's disrespectful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was such, I because I watched it from its inception, like just catch fire. And what I found so beautiful was the fact that Dr. Barlow came on and said, "This was never my intent." And she said, "I don't even have capacity to pick this up in the way that it needs to be."
Yeah.
And that quickly, Black women swooped in, created a registrar's office, admin,
Hmm.
somebody created the
Advisors.
logo, they
Right.
created advisors, the
Yeah.
database of all, like if you just email here, they compiled the professors in a database with their TikToks.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? Like, yes, we said that it's for free, but my God, that showed our ability towards togetherness
Hmm.
and towards like, what? This
Yeah.
is nuts. And just that quickly, it white tears came in and destroyed it. But also some of us came in and tried to market
Yep.
and make $1 off of it.
Hmm.
And now it's shadow banned. And
Yep.
I'm like, this is such a microcosm of what we deal with on a daily basis,
Daily
because
basis.
that thing, and it's also kitchen table talk, right? Because it was never her intention. I think had it been her intention, she would have, put it on another platform. And I kept hoping, I was like, I know they're gonna like take this to Patreon or take this to another platform, or Thinkific or one of those platforms like that, or Teachable. Like, can we take it over there? Um, and it hasn't transitioned over. I think it kind of lost its steam a bit. Like, I still see some professors on there, the ones that I followed, they still come on and teach, and I still post my classes and stuff on there too. But I just looked at that and I was like, my God, this stuff is so ingrained in us
Mm-hmm.
that this beautiful thing fell apart so
Yeah,
quickly. Like it was
real
under a
quick.
week.
You got the
It was
page
under a
hacks and
week.
everything. And it's sad because we
Oh my
want,
God.
but it should have been it should have been a private page, something. So much good could have come out of it. And I'm appreciative of you all who are still going and doing this. It's just I don't know. I don't know. But I think
You know,
that
I think where it went wrong was like building it on TikTok. It should have just been like somebody should have like created a server and said, "Hey, y'all come on over here where it could kind of be vetted." But then
right.
it was, the same conversation is up. There is and I cannot think of the name of his account. But there's a white man and he is going around to different HBCUs,
I know what you're talking about.
and the way he puts it is, yeah, like he's
Yeah.
demonstrating the culture to white people and teaching them. And my thing is, and it's, in the HBCU Facebook group, there's so many of us in there.
Mm-hmm.
And my thing is, who keeps inviting him to homecoming? Like, why he
That
got an open invite? We don't need him to come and teach white people about us. Like, that's not,
right.
and his whole thing is like, well, I want white people who work in HR to know that HBCUs are viable. Can you do that without getting an invite to the like?
That
What's your
part.
other way of doing it besides coming? Yeah, like there's other ways for you to do that, but and you even see it in the conversation. We are so welcoming. Oh, I think it's a great thing that he's doing, and meanwhile, he's on his TikTok telling the white people, if your kid comes home and they're wearing this shirt, it's an HBCU. Why are they wearing the shirt? We're not pets. We're not
Right.
pet projects. We're
Right.
not. But see,
Right.
that goes back to slave culture where it's like, I'm going to wear your skin. I'm going to wear
Correct.
your skin and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
come home and I'm going to be the coolest thing because I'm wearing a black person's skin.
Yep.
They've been doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
y'all think it's okay.
Yeah. They think it's
And then
okay.
when
We're
those of
so
us say, "Oh,
inviting.
this ain't cool," we wrong.
Yeah. Because we're always so inviting. We're so, in fact, women, we're so motherly, and it's we've always done it. Again, going back historically, we've done that way to because we had no choice, but it's to keep us out of trouble and to protect us. But we have a little freedom
Mm-hmm.
now. We don't have to do that. And if we want people to respect us with the rights that we have been given as human beings, then we
Mm-hmm.
need to set boundaries. There is nothing wrong with, I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate a good boundary. Okay. And you don't have to be ugly with it. You don't have to be nasty with it, but there are boundaries. Some things are unacceptable. We do not have to invite everybody into the space. You don't invite every family member into your house. I don't, there's some family
Okay.
members, there are some, I know we talked earlier about, about speaking our ancestors. There are some ancestors whose names I will never speak out loud because they are not good ancestors. I don't want that
That part.
energy around me or in my house.
That part.
I'm very protective of who I let in my space because I
Yep.
don't know what you have on you. So the characteristics and
Yep.
energies and spirits that people have on them, they transfer. And you don't want
Yeah.
certain people's mindset to be in your space. You shouldn't want to.
Right. Yet here we are inviting everybody in, and then we can't get to forming a proper, like a healthy identity for ourselves,
Mhm.
and something that we can some way somehow all agree on in there. You know what I mean? Like something that suits us all.
Mhm.
And that's why I wanted us to be able to start having these conversations today, because I firmly believe that, like I said, I don't think history is repeating itself. I think it's not Groundhog Day.
Right.
We're not going back and reliving the same thing. the same day. We just get
Right.
up this day and the stuff is still there because
It's still there.
we just like we've never. I
We're
don't
waking
think
up in
we've
the shit
ever
show,
properly
same shit
addressed
show
it.
every day.
Hmm. It's the same thing. And then when we try to teach and talk about these things, it's like, it's disputed because, like, my favorite conversation about touching hair,
Mhm.
and people don't understand that. And I don't know why they don't understand, but they're not grasping the concept of black bodies being for recreation for everybody else. And
Listen,
so
I had an
they were
elder.
able to walk up and just touch you.
I had a lady who was an elder. She's probably in her 60s. Tried to do that to me, and she was a black woman. And I almost had to hit the matrix move. I was like, "What are you doing?" Well, I can't touch your hair.
Hmm.
No, ma'am, you can. I'm like,
No.
how long have you been black? Don't touch my hair. Like, are you serious? Don't do that.
Right.
Don't ever do that. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah,
I
because my
didn't know.
mother
You
taught me,
should know.
my mother just taught me that it was that, like, first of all, you don't want everybody's hands in your hair because
No.
everybody don't wash their hands. But she said, if you ever come home and I, like your hair ain't the same as the way I sent you to school, you got people playing in your hair, you're gonna have a problem
Yep.
with me. And then she just said, she was like, look, you can't, people will think that you're a toy, they'll think that you're a
Hmm.
doll and stuff. And it was
Correct.
when we first moved to Baltimore and we moved to kind of like a whiter side of town.
Hmm.
She said, don't let them touch you
Don't
because they're
pat
going to
me.
ask you, they want to touch your skin. You are not a dog, they should not be petting you. Do not let
Correct.
them touch you. And she
Correct.
said, I want you to fear, and now this is, but she said, I want you to fear coming home and me finding out that they pet you. Like, I want you to put
Yeah.
that boundary up so
Yeah.
severely. Like, do you want to come home and talk to me about why they pet you, or do you want to handle them?
Yeah.
Which one you want to do? And I was like, I'm going to go ahead and handle them.
Handle them.
I'm going to
Correct.
handle them.
Correct.
But that came into, um, and the little white kids would try, but it came in handy as an adult, working in Alpharetta in Georgia. I was working at a day spa, and it was mainly white. It was me, maybe one or two other workers there that were black, but mainly a white clientele.
Hmm.
White, very well to do. But one of the other estheticians, I was totaling them out for the night because I worked as an esthetician, but I also did the front desk from
Hmm.
time to time, and I was totaling everybody out. And I used to come in with my hair like just straight and like curled or like bumped or something like that. And one day I came in with it curly because I had just done a wash and go. And I was like, all
Hmm.
right, I had done a twist out. And it was the end of the night, and I was totaling her and another lady out, and she just reached and I put a block up.
Yeah.
And but I hit her like this, like because it was like this. And she was like, and I said, you all right? Well, I was just gonna touch her
No.
hair. I said, no, you were not. Why were you gonna touch my hair? Well, it's so pretty and you never wore it like that. And I said, and it's on my head. Why were you gonna touch my hair? I said, I want you to tell me why you were gonna touch my hair.
Oh my
Well,
God.
I just wanted to feel what it feels like. I said, put your hands in
No.
your own head. You want to feel
Correct.
some hair, put your hands in your own head. And I
Hmm.
remember the other esthetician looked and she was just like, and then she's the other girl, she kind of white tears. And I said, don't do that.
Don't. Yeah.
Don't, and I had to tell her too. I said, you think because I'm light, I'm not really black? Go don't touch my hair. You're gonna find out how black I am today. Don't let the light skin fool you. Because I said, you never did that to any of the other brown skin girls in here because you scared. You thought that you was comfortable with me because I'm light. I'm about the blackest thing you've ever seen. Don't touch me. Don't do
I
it.
have. Yeah. I
And I
have a
said,
friend.
you're gonna be cool tomorrow. We're gonna forget all about this, but you're gonna remember, don't touch me. And I
Right.
remember the other esthetician said, well, that was a little harsh. I said, no, ma'am. It was
It was
not
not.
harsh. I am not a petting zoo. I'm
Correct.
not here for your recreation, and I do not have to kill your curiosity.
Hmm.
No, ma'am, you do not touch me. I said, now there might be another black person out here you could play with, but it's not me.
Yeah.
It's
I
not
have a
me.
friend that happened to. It try a nurse tried to do that to one of her daughters. She's very, very fair skinned, nice, nice long hair and everything. And she had to let her know, don't ever. My child is not a dog. She's not a toy. You don't pet her as though she is. Like, don't ever do that. They have this problem with touching and feeling, and it's like, don't.
Mhm.
We are not on display anymore. Don't do that. I don't need you to
Yeah.
check my teeth. I don't need you to check my physique, my hair. None of that.
Well, and when we talk about stuff that gets passed down for us, those are things that get passed down for
Hmm.
them. Those
Yeah.
are those silent contracts, those unwritten things, or they may have been taught to do it. I don't
Hmm.
know, but that stuff gets passed down for them. So it's always interesting, I mean, because the black experience is, it's not the same across the board for all of
Hmm.
us. Um, and so it's always interesting to me that there are some that are just like, no, like it's okay. They're curious and they want to, and I want to teach them. We are not the same. I'm
I don't
not
have the
teaching
band. I don't
nobody.
have the bandwidth to do that. I'm sorry. Not
I
at this
don't.
age.
I'm not a cosmetology school. I'm not
No.
going to do it. No, and so if they want to teach, then do that. But it lends to us not ultimately being on the same page, so these things can get overturned. Because if they figure out, oh, there's a black person over here that'll do it, why won't you do it? Because I am not them. Don't try me.
But here's the thing.
And so we have to figure that out.
We know more about white people than they know about themselves. We've always known because we've had to
Yeah.
watch them, pay attention to them, know their moods, know what they were going to do at all times in order for us to know how to act at that particular time and what we could and could not do.
Mm,
But they want to ask us something, and sometimes we'll be truthful with them and sometimes we'll not, depending upon if we think it's going to get us in trouble or not. So just the same way as we can watch them and learn everything, they can watch and learn things too. So
yeah.
I mean they watch our music and our culture and take that. So why would you not just sit back and watch simple things, and something as simple as learning how to treat someone or talk to someone,
Right.
just as well as we do. So I never look at that excuse or even accept that excuse for them, because we are very perceptive people. We pay attention to everything. And so
Yeah.
I think sometimes they're just so, whatever in life, that they don't pay attention to a lot. But we have to have, we have to have boundaries. But I do want to say that even for me being in Louisiana, everything you said about hair is absolutely true. But also Louisiana, we don't play the hair thing, because old women will tell you someone will take your hair and put it in their hair, and you will be bald.
Yeah.
Don't ever go to a hairdresser
Yeah.
whose hair is shorter than yours. Like, we really have these spiritual things. Like, we don't play about hair. Don't leave the hair in the brush.
Yeah.
So don't let the
Don't leave
the
that.
birds
Yeah. Yeah.
birds
I had to
hair.
clean the hairbrush out at the end of the night. Yeah.
Hmm. So it's just little things, because you can, like, don't set yourself up for no reason.
Yeah. No. And you know what? And I always go by the mantra that we have to live in their world and they don't
Yeah,
have to live in ours, right? So as
correct.
black people, we have to live in both of these worlds. They don't
Right.
ever have to step foot in ours. And when they do step foot in ours, it can be for recreation only. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be because they want to take an introspective look. It
Correct.
can be strictly for recreation
Hmm.
purposes and strictly to siphon. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be because they're looking at you as a person and trying to figure out how you're moving and what you're doing. It doesn't have to do with any of that.
Right.
And so I think we talk about code switching and stuff like that all the time, but I don't think we pay attention to how deep all of this stuff goes. Like
Mhm.
it's so deeply embedded, and it controls every single move that we make. And we
Mhm.
can make different moves, we can have things look different, um but the awareness has to be there.
Yeah.
Like that awareness has to be there, which is why I'm like, we got to start having these conversations, because I've seen the stuff in the books. It's there. It's written. It's there for us to read it. But are people reading it? Probably not. Maybe feeling like it's outdated stuff, but it's not. Like all this stuff is so completely current.
You have to
But I
read
think we have to have
everything.
these conversations,
Everything
because
you
it's
have to read.
like you have to. Like it's already been written out. It's already there. There's blueprints. There's answers to
Right.
stuff too. um we have to just be as open as possible,
Right.
to turn in that corner. So if y'all have any last questions, because I see you guys in the chat has been going, so I appreciate y'all for being here and joining us live. um Conversation is going to go up on my YouTube. So it'll be easily shared, and Yael is going to, she'll have the link as well to be able to post to her page. But before we wrap up, I want you to give everybody like all your socials, all your
Okay.
websites, and everything else so they can have that.
Gotcha. I was trying to figure out how to type it in there, but that is okay. So, my you can find me on. I am on Instagram under Yaya, Jae. So excuse me, Yaya. Let me make sure it's right because I don't want to give you the why. Excuse me, scratch that. Because I had to change it because Instagram just deleted my page and I had to make a whole new one. Fiasco. So it's JAEARIE underscore YAYA. And I'm also on Facebook, Yaya Gordon, Gordon. And my website that I periodically update with some of the events that I do is JAELYAYAGORDON dot contently. That's CONTENTLY.com. And that is how to reach me. And thank you so much for having
I'm
me.
so glad you
I
came
enjoyed this
through.
conversation.
Yeah. This was so good. I feel like there'll have to be a part two at some point in time.
Anytime,
Um,
anytime.
just coming up, because there's, yeah, because there's so much that's happening in the world, and I know a lot of what we're going through can definitely be linked to historical context. So I want to always be able to like reach back and bring that stuff forward too. And then you have free reign on my love blog to have something on in print. So if there's things that you want to write about and content that you want to create there, you are my special guest there for the month. But
Thank you. Thank
thank
you.
you so much for
Thank
coming on
you.
with me today. And thank you to everybody that joined live. The replay of this will be up shortly.
Thank you.